Okay. Hey guys. So let's talk about queue processor today. In the last session, we worked on agents, standard agent and advanced agent. And then I clearly told you that these agents are deprecated in Pega 8. And there is a replacement to them, which is job scheduler and queue processor. Job scheduler replaces your advanced agent. Queue processor is going to replace your standard agent. Okay. So let's start with queue processor. Now let's discuss about queue processor first. Like what exactly is a queue processor? As I told you, this is a complete replacement to your standard agent. So starting from Pega 8, if you have any background processing to be configured, something like, opening a work object, updating it, or opening a work object and, sending an email on it, or updating the status, or adding some history, or calling a soap service in the background. If you want to do any such things, always write a queue processor for internal background processing, where you want to open a case, update the case, and do some processing and data update on top of it. Do not write agents anymore. Okay, if you're still seeing agents, yeah, that is available in the Pega tool. That is because of backward compatibility. So suddenly they can't remove the feature, right? So just for backward compatibility, you can still see the agent rules in Pega, but that doesn't mean that you can go and create an agent in Pega 8. Okay, so you only have to create job schedulers and queue process, and if you have any upgrade projects, we have to convert all your agents into job schedulers and queue processors. Now queue processor is a replacement to your standard agents. And this, what is the difference between your standard agent and queue processor? The major difference is this is using Kafka for queuing the items. So in earlier versions of Pega, when you are using agents, your standard agent was always using a default queue mechanism to queue the items, and it was always found in a table called as pr underscore sysqueues table. And you used to pick the items from the queue and process it. The agent used to pick and process it. Now to achieve more scalability and to have more parallel processing, okay, Pega switched to Kafka. So now they're using a messaging system called as Kafka. Okay, it's basically a messaging system. So what do we do in Kafka? Nothing. You just push some messages and other party is going to subscribe and receive the messages. Okay, so what is the benefit of this? So if you don't have Kafka, if you want to exchange information between multiple systems, you have to use some integration like SOAP, REST, MQs, JMS, and something like that. But integration is little complex. Okay, if you have to send updates to multiple systems, so, maybe like if let's take something like stock market. Whenever a stock price changes, maybe you have to send update to multiple systems. So integration with multiple systems becomes complex. So to make things simple, what we do is we use a messaging system like this, which has a publish and subscribe option. So publish and subscribe means the let's say for example, I am the producer and you guys are the consumers. So I publish a message, and those all who want to receive the messages, they subscribe and they receive the messages. So this makes things easy. So one party will push the message, the other party will receive and consume the message. So those who want to consume, they will consume by subscribing to it. So this makes things easy. We use Kafka messaging system, and the producers will publish the messages, the consumers will subscribe for the messages, and they will receive the messages. So this is basically a messaging system. You just push some messages and other party will consume it. So now Pega is using this Kafka for data processing, and each Kafka will have multiple partitions. I just want to show you a diagram of Kafka with multiple partitions. This is how it is. You'll have a lot of partitions like this. In each partition, you will store the message. Okay, so parallel processing can happen with multiple partitions over there. That's a benefit. Okay, now yes, your queue processor is using Kafka messaging queues to queue the item. Now you'll keep the item in the Kafka queues. Then your queue processor rule whenever the timer expires, just like your standard agent. If you remember, whenever the timer expires, your agent used to check if there are any messages in the queue. If there are any messages, then it will go ahead and process. If there are no messages, it will get back to sleep. Same concept. If there are any messages in the queue, your queue processor will process it. Otherwise, it will stay in the rest period. So you're going to use this queues for processing. And in earlier days, when you're queuing the item, you used to use a method called as queue for agent. Now there's a slight difference. You're going to use a method called as queue for processing. Method in the activity to keep an item in the queue. Only if you keep an item in the queue, then somebody can receive and process it, right? So in order to keep an item in the queue, earlier you used a method called as queue for agent. Now you have to use it as queue for processing. So this will be kept in the queue, and later your agent or your queue processor can wake up and process the item and get back to sleep. Okay, and whenever you create a new queue processor rule in Pega automatically creates a queue processor, sorry, a Kafka cluster with the same name as your queue processor name. Suppose I created a queue processor with the name as sample queue processor, then automatically a Kafka cluster will be created with the same name as sample queue processor. Okay, so Kafka clusters will be created and partitions will be created. By default, Pega is giving you 20 partitions for Kafka. So 20 partitions will be created for each of your Kafka clusters. And then they'll be used for parallel processing. Now, let's start with the introduction to what are the options present in a queue processor. In order to create a queue processor, you have to go to sysadmin. So right click, sysadmin, create, scroll down and down till you find queue processors. Queue processor. Okay, unlike agents, if you remember in agents you used to have a master agent, master rule, where you used to dump all your agents and the master rule name should be your rule set name. That is not the case here. For each agent you can have your customized names, right? Here you can create multiple queue process for each business requirement you have. So it is not necessary that you should have a parent rule like this and inside that you have your child like this and parent rule name should be the rule set name. There is no such requirement now. You can create multiple queue process. There is no parent. You can give whatever name you want, not necessary to be the rule set name. That is the first thing. Second thing is this is how you stop and start your queue process. Stop and start. Okay. Just like your agents, you have this checkbox, right? Stop and start, enable and disable. Then on which node types you want to run. Same like earlier, which node types you want to run, you used to decide here. Then immediate or delayed. What is this? See, when you say immediate, okay, it means that when I keep an item in the queue, it has to be processed immediately. When I say delayed, when I keep an item in the queue, you will give some time, like process it only after 1 hour or only after 2 hours or 24 hours. So after the time expires, then they will process the item. Okay, so it's up to your requirement, which one you want, you can choose. Number of threads per node, so like how many parallel processing you want to do. Number of threads, you can define that. It's up to your business requirement. Then finally, the most important activity which is going to process your data which is kept in the queue will be here. Okay, and how many reattempts you want to do. Suppose my activity couldn't process the case, maybe I got some exception, or maybe the case was opened by a user, so I could not acquire the log. So the queue processor can retry. How many retries? I said 3 times. Now what is the delay in between the retry? So now I tried. Am I supposed to try it in the next 1 minute or next 2 minutes? No, you should give some gap, right? You can't try immediately. Give some sufficient gap. Like maybe you can give a 15 minutes gap or half an hour gap. So to calculate the gap period, you use a delay factor. So this delay factor into this. So 2 into 1. So 2 minutes gap you're giving. You can give your delay factor and that much time it will wait. And some threshold time, like you expect your queue processor to complete the whole processing within 2 seconds. Or whatever threshold time you want, you can give. If it takes more than the time, then there'll be alert logged. Okay. Then all queue processes are resolved against the context. See, if you remember when we discussed about agents, we discussed about access group, right? Advanced agents use the access group kept here, whereas standard agents use the access group of the user who has queued the item. Similarly, in queue processor, by default, they will take the access group, this one, like they can consider this application, this roles and everything. If you want to change it, you can change it. Where can you change it? I will tell you when we are queuing the item, where can you change the access group. Okay, by default, it takes this application and this roles, I mean. Okay, so I created a sample queue processor like this. I said immediate processing I want, and I gave a sample activity, which is just going to create a new page. After queuing the data, the data will be present on some primary page. We don't know which page, because Pega will maintain some primary page, to hold the data that you have queued. So somebody has queued the data. Now this activity is taking the item from the queue and trying to process it. So when it has taken from the queue, Pega will keep it on some page. We don't know which page it is. So I used page copy to copy data onto some temp page. I didn't give the from page because I don't know on which page it is there. So Pega will take the primary page and I'm copying into temp. After copying the data, I'm just trying to log a message. Queue processor queued item is, you can say temp.pyd, you can say .pyd. I'm just trying to log a message, a sample activity. Okay. Now this is to process the item which is present in the queue. Now who is going to keep in the queue? I should write down some piece of code to keep an item in the queue, right? Only once the item is present in the queue, you can create a page, copy the data into the page and log your case ID and do whatever you want you can do here. But where is the logic to queue an item? As I told you, to queue an item, earlier you used to use queue for agent method in the activity. Now you have to use queue for processing method. Or the other way to queue is, there are two ways to queues. You can use run in background smart shape in the flow, or you can use this method. Anything is fine. Okay. So let's use something like that and queue an item. So let me take some flow. There's a smart shape. Under automations, you will see a smart shape run in background. Take that. Okay. Type of queue, you can use standard or dedicated. What is standard? What is dedicated? I'll explain in the next few minutes. Okay. You can take anything standard or dedicated. First, let me take standard. Then it is asking you what is the activity to process the item. So the activity that you gave here, this activity you have to give there. Do you want to acquire the log? Do you want to change the access group? By default, it takes the access group of the person who is queuing the item. If you want, you can change it from here. Okay, it's up to you. If you want to bypass and give a different access group, you can do that. Now, submit. Let's give some audit so that you will understand that this item is queued. Item queued to queue processor. I gave an audit. Submit. Save. Let's create a case and see how it is working. Now, why don't we turn on the tracer so that we can see? So you can see here pz run in background. Okay, that utility is executing and it might have queued the item. So you can check in the audit history. Item queued to queue processor. Okay. Now, as you gave immediate here, okay, you gave immediate processing, right? Which means after keeping it in the queue, it will be processing it immediately. This one, it will process it immediately. So if it has processed, I should see a log with the case ID. So this is the case ID, right? Let me see if there's a log with this ID. That will indicate whether my queue process is working or not. System operations logs. I'm just trying to check the logs. Log files. Click on this hyperlink of Pega. and try to filter it with this one. Oh my god, it is a lot of times it got executed. Okay, no, 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 no. I should process with the whole thing. Queue process. Queued item is. Hmm. Let me check. Maybe my logs are not refreshing. Just give me a moment. Let me check. This is immediate and I have standard queue processor activity, right? Let me try again. Oh, I didn't select anything. Mm-hmm. And this is working. It is queuing the item. So far, it is good. Let's wait for a minute and see whether the agent is processing, queue processor is processing it or not. System, operations, logs, and log files, and Pega. Okay, so now you can see it like, I did the queuing standard and I gave my activity and everything. And then when I go and check in the logs, you can see the case ID that I have queued. Okay, so which means that my queue processor is working. So this is my queue processor rule, which have an activity inside it, which just logs the case ID that is queued to it. Okay, and it is working. Now, I didn't show you how the Kafka folders are created, right? So if you go inside your drive in which PRPC is installed and you go to Tomcat and Kafka data folder, there you will see a lot of Kafka clusters like this for each of your queue processor created. So this is the one for mine. I created a queue processor with the name sample queue processor, right? So Pega created Kafka clusters for that. You can see like this. In total, there will be 20 partitions created. Okay. And what is the importance of this standard and dedicated? This is very important to know from your interview point of view. Difference between standard and dedicated. So when you say standard, okay, there is a default Kafka cluster, like OOTB one, there is a Kafka cluster which Pega uses for queuing up the items. That is this one, PZ standard processor. Whereas if you say dedicated, it will go to the dedicated Kafka cluster that you have created, nothing but your sample queue processor. So it will go with this one. Okay, so based on your requirement you can go. If it is standard, you can go with the OOTB one. If it is dedicated, you can go with the customized one. So what do you prefer? Means, so it depends on your requirement. When you say standard, it's like a generic table or it's like a generic message, Kafka cluster. Means many people will be keeping inside it. Whereas if you have some lot of data and if you need a dedicated queue for your processing, then go for dedicated. Otherwise, you can go with standard. Now it's up to your choice. If it's a small requirement, minimal data you want to process, go with standard. If it's a huge requirement, you have a lot of data to be processed, you can go with a dedicated queue or a dedicated cluster. So based on that, you can go. So there's one way you can queue your item. The other way to queue is just why don't we take a utility shape? Let me remove this. Okay, plug in the utility here. Now let's write down an activity to queue the item. Okay, let me call it as queue to queue processor, QP. Okay, I'm going to write an activity just to queue the item. Okay, create. As I told you, the method used to queue is queue for processing. Earlier it was queue for agent, now it is queue for processing. And I want to queue py work page. So I'm giving py work page here. Using a page, don't forget to define it in pages and classes. It belongs to my work class. And there are parameters. This is the place where you can again specify the delayed time. So it is asking me standard queue or dedicated queue. Standard means I told you, right, it will go with the OOTB Kafka cluster. Dedicated means you can use your Kafka cluster. And you can give the log configuration alerts. Do you want to queue immediately or do you want to queue after some time? Like I told you, you can give some delayed time, like after how much time you want to queue, you can do that. Okay, and after how much time you want to acquire the lock, timeout to acquire the lock and all that. Again, if you want to override the access group, you can override it. Same thing, threshold time to process all the records. So you can give all these things here. You can try dedicated now because you tried standard there, you can try dedicated. Okay, so after 30 minutes the lock will be gone, and let's try this. And make sure you don't have this checkbox and keep this of type utility. Okay, now back to the flow, save your changes. Let's create a case and see how it will work. And one more thing, if you want to know whether it is okay, after this there is an activity to queue and now it will be queued. Okay, and now you can again go and check the logs to see whether this case ID is present in the logs or not. Okay, you see the case ID, the one that we just processed. Okay, so it is getting, it's processed by the queue processor. So this way you can use standard queues or dedicated queues. You can queue using running background shape, or you can queue using queue for processing method. Either of the ways you can process, and you can do the cases. And you can see the Kafka cluster here. Now how about the tables? So earlier, you can query a table pr underscore sysqueues to see the data, right? Now which table now? So for this there is a class again, like earlier you had a class. Okay, so earlier it was system queue default entry when you were using the agents. Now it is system message queue processor. Okay, and you have two classes under that, broken item and delayed item. Why don't you see? So delayed item means for your dedicated queues. When you're doing delay, you give some timer delay, right? Like after how much time you want to process. So the delayed items will be seen in this class mapped table. So if you open the class definition form, it has a table. If you query the table, you can see the items which are placed in this queue. pr underscore sys underscore delayed queue. For agents, it was pr sys queue, right? This is pr sys delayed queue. Similarly, while processing the item, if you run into any issues and you get some exception or error, that broken items will be kept in this table, which is called as PRSys message QP underscore broken items. Okay, these two are the tables. Now, from Admin Studio, how can you control it? Like I have shown you in the earlier session, Admin Studio, you can turn on and off your agents from here. You can trace your agents from here, right? Similarly, queue processors, you can turn on, you can turn off, you can trace from here. Here is a queue processor. You can stop it, you can start it, you can trace it. Okay. Now, how about the broken items? Just like your agents, I have shown you the broken items, right? If you go to resources, you will see requester pools or agent queues, I think. Yeah, this one. You can see the broken stuff here. Okay, there are total 17 broken items. Okay, so like this, you can always, configure your queue process. So that's it about queue processors, guys.